First of all, remove the low-end rumble, like so. Then check out if there are any resonating frequencies, because chances are you haven't recorded this in a professional studio. You recorded it at home with some acoustic treatment, which I show you some examples of in maybe this video or maybe in this video. You can check those out, how to get the most out of your microphones and make the most out of the sound in your room. Even if you use a lot of acoustic treatment and if you're conscious about your mic technique and positioning and everything, you still need to treat your vocal afterwards, after the fact. So you do a quick EQ sweep, and then you find ringing resonances and you just cut them by a bit, like so. Now, many would argue that you shouldn't do this, but I would still argue, find those ringing frequencies and just lower them by a decibel, not more. It's not the end of the world, you know. And then there's the S's. You need to remove the S's. You can do this by using a dynamic EQ, a multiband compressor, or a dedicated de-esser, like these ones that I showed you just now. And a little goes a long way as well. You just need to experiment and figure out what sounds most natural, because you don't want your S's to sound muffled. And then you want to remove all the plosives that has snuck into your recording. Even though you use the pop filter, there are still pops and cracks, especially the case and the piece can be nasty. So use this transient designer. There are a couple. This one is free and this one is paid. And there are several out there on the market. You should just use one and play with the attack. Lower the attack a bit and see what you get. And also, if you have some surplus reverb in your room, you can use the sustain button to tame some of that as well. So that was removing shit you don't need. Next up is adding shit you need. You take another EQ and you boost, you make a more gentle sweep this time, like so. And then you boost the frequencies, and then you try to find, okay, this is a nice frequency. And then you boost it by a bit, like so. Often there are boosts in the bottom of the frequency spectrum, and there are some in the top. That's my experience, at least. I seldom boost 500 hertz or 1K, even though that might occur as well. It really depends on the source material. There are no straight answers to that. You just have to experiment. But if you start experimenting with this, you will improve your skills in mixing rap vocals. And that's the whole point of this video. So adding stuff. Another thing you can add is harmonics. So you can load up a saturation plugin and you can play around with the controls. If you want to go extreme, do it and use the wet dry button if your plugin has that. That's a great tip for adding some richness to your sound. And I think that's it. Next up is controlling the dynamics. I can't stress this enough because vocal recordings are by nature extremely dynamic. You have the peaks and you have the dips and you have to retain control of it. So the first thing I would do to control the dynamics is to use clip gain automation, like so. I cut out a part of the region and I lower them in volume. And then I cut some quiet parts and I just raise the volume a bit. Not by much, never more than maybe 2 or 3 dB at most. And I listen back and check if it sounds okay. Because if I go too extreme, it will sound strange and weird. And the next thing I would do is to use a compressor to control the peaks again, because I don't want to take everything with the clip gain automation. And that's a good concept to follow as well. I like to use, especially when it comes to dynamics, I like to use several compressors. So this clip gain automation thing is sort of like a manual compressor. And then I would add another compressor, a straight vanilla compressor like this one, or even this one. And I would use fast attack and medium release and just lower the threshold or increase the input to get around maybe 4 or 5 decibels of gain reduction. And then I would take another compressor again with slower attack and faster release and do more or less the same. And this would be, I like to use another compressor for this, and maybe something with a bit more color, such as an 1176 or an LA2A or any old school type of compressor to add some harmonic distortion and more richness to the sound. I also like the Soft Tube Tech. It's a great plugin for second compression. And later down the line, I might even add another compressor, and that would be maybe a multiband compressor to control the highs. Even though I have been de-essing, some of those harsh sounds may reoccur when applying compression. So I would use maybe that as the final compressor before the limiter, of course. And the final thing would be a limiter or a clipper that would make sure that would solidify the dynamics. Then comes adding space and dimension to the vocal recording. In a rap recording, typically, especially in boom bap, oftentimes your vocal should sound really dry. You know, when you're kicking it live, there's no reverb. You don't wash a rap recording in reverb because it's so full of transients, and it's the contents of the words and all the rhymes. They would just be flushed away with a lot of reverb. But I always use reverb on vocals, on rap vocals, even though you can't hear it. It's just to add something on the sides, because the vocal is always mono in the middle, especially the lead vocal at least. It's just strictly mono. And then I would add some reverb effects to have around the vocals. I would use 2 reverb sends like this, and I would have one of them on the left side and the other on the right side, hard panned, so they don't interfere with the vocal in the mid. And to make my adjustments, I would increase the volume considerably, and then I would lower it back until it's inaudible, but I can still feel it's there, if that makes sense. Oftentimes, instead of reverb, I would use delay, or I would use both. With delay, I would use maybe 1/16th delay and maybe ping pong it or dual mono it, so it's a bit stereo. I want the vocal to be a bit more stereo-y. Even though there are backing tracks, I want the lead vocal to be in the middle, but still all around the place, just in the background, subtle. And then finally, I would add another echo plugin. For example, this one from Echo Boy from Sound Toys. I really like that plugin. And I would make something that I would call echo throw echo or throw delay, because I would throw it in sometimes and then I would cut it out to insert some interest and some surprising elements. Maybe crazy echo that comes in only once per verse or twice or 3 times to accentuate certain phrases or what have you, or to fill some gaps or dead spaces. The final thing I would do is to automate. Now, what do I mean by automate? Well, you have the vocal, it's there, the dynamics are consistent, but however, the beat might not be so consistent. Maybe there are quiet parts in the beat, maybe there are dense parts. To compensate for that, I would use volume automation, lower in volume and increase in volume as fits the beat. And when there are punchlines, I would increase the volume a bit to accentuate the words, or I would, before a hook, lower the volume gently to make the hook come in with more impact. And I would automate the filter slopes in the EQ, the vocal EQ, one of the vocal EQs. You can automate the reverb, you can automate the delay. There are basically no boundaries for what you can or cannot automate. And that's what's so enjoyable about being a mix engineer, is that there are endless possibilities in doing subtle movements and changes to increase interest. And even though you can't hear those changes necessarily with the naked ear, they are there and you can feel them even though they are. So there we have it. 5 great tips for making rap vocals sound as best as possible. Now, what do you think? Have you used any of these methods before? Which one of these methods do you like the most? And which one is the most important one? Let me know in the comments.